morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning, Victoria. Good morning, Jodie. This is our fourth session of Raising the Bar, and I want to introduce my incredibly distinguished faculty members. We're calling this session Collaborative Approaches to Leadership Transition, and I think these two women exemplify so much of what's great about the world of classical dance, but also the future. So, moving first to my dear friend, Victoria Morgan, who came to Cincinnati Ballet in 1997 after an amazing career as a principal dancer at San Francisco Ballet and Ballet West. Among her many, many accomplishments, she erased $800,000 in debt. In 2008, she became the CEO because she didn't have enough to do already, built a $14.5 million endowment. And then in 2016, 2017, she transitioned out of being CEO AD and became just the artistic director. She's initiated so many programs with female choreographers, which is how we got to know each other. And then done something I think which is really important, and I'd love both of you to talk about, which is collaborated with other companies, in this case, Ballet Met. In an article she said about her leadership transition, I also feel there's a required stimulus and infusion of new ideas and energy that always needs to be part of a growing, evolving, and exciting arts organization. And that is exactly, I think, what she gets with the new artistic director of Cincinnati Ballet, Jodie Gates, who has a very, very distinguished and interesting career. Apparently, she never sleeps. She was the founding artistic director at USC of the Gloria Kaufman School of Dance, also the Laguna Dance Festival. She turned pro, from what I understand, at age 16 and worked with Robert Joffrey. Principal dancer at Frankfurt Complexions, which I didn't know, which is really interesting. Philadelphia, previously Pennsylvania, now Philadelphia Ballet. An artistic collaborator with William Forsythe, which I would love to talk about a little bit. So many interesting women coming out of that. She's created over 60 ballets. And in 2021, 2022, she was a resident fellow at Center for Ballet and the Arts. Numerous honors, but I also want to point out she helped found the Artistic Directors Coalition for Ballet in America. When Victoria Morgan was asked who she wanted to lead the organization and describe the ideal candidate, she said, somebody creative, charged up, and who can be a visionary, someone who has had a high level experience in our art form, a leader who is also kind and supportive, and who opens doors to find new ideas while still embracing Cincinnati Ballet's philosophies. And I think that's why this has been such an extraordinarily successful transition. Good morning. Welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Thank you. So, Victoria, I'm going to go first with you. You've had very, very different career trajectories that brought you to Cincinnati. I gave a little bit of resume of your biography, but is there something that you'd like to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting when you decide that you want to be an artistic director. What is that about? For me, as with a lot of people, I think there's sometimes a trauma in your life that shifts the whole direction of your life. And so I had a personal trauma and also a professional trauma. My professional trauma was that I'd been with this San Francisco Opera as their resident choreographer for several years. And in that capacity, I worked with the chorus, I worked with the divas, and I worked a lot with the supers. And there was a ballet company inside that massive umbrella. But when I was working with the supers, I had this experience where I was given a really simple idea about how to move. It was, rhythmical, it was ritual, it was supposed to be 20 people moving together. And it was just hours and hours, and it still was not good. And I remember going to dinner with my then boyfriend and trying to describe it. And I just started crying. I felt like, wait a minute, how did I get so far away from the thing I love, from the nugget, from the nucleus of my life? And so it was a very personal kind of feeling. And I was talking to a boyfriend that I'd been with for 10 years. And I said, let's get married. He said, no. And I thought, wake up, Victoria, grab onto something important, grab onto something that's going to feed your aesthetic and your artistic side, and grab onto something that is going to give you some financial security. And so, I mean, that was I kind of got inspired about believing that I could move forward in a way that would be more powerful in my life.
So instead of getting squished and getting smaller, you use sort of trauma, but you also use disruption to get bigger and imagine new possibilities, which I think is really, really courageous. I keep bringing up the F-bomb in these interviews. And the F-bomb is not a swear word. It is failure and what to do when you're presented with failure. I think we could do a whole segment on that, but this is a really interesting example of turning it around, which I imagine, talk about a gut check. Jodie, tell us a little bit about some other things about your background and then what brought you to Cincinnati that I might not have covered.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So, what you did say about me moving to New York City at 16 and working with Robert Joffrey, well, that really helped shaped me. It's part of my DNA. But even at that age, I felt that Robert Joffrey saw the potential in me as a leader and a teacher and would send me out for master classes to represent the company on tour when I was 20, 21 years old.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of my career. And I was there for 15 years, then went on for another, 10 years as a principal ballerina in Frankfurt Complexions and in Philadelphia Ballet. When I retired from the stage only because I didn't want to do one more plie. I was done. So satisfied. I was done. But what I remember is all that time.
Oh my God, that's hysterical.
I had been observing all my mentors, including Bill and Mr. Joffrey and everyone that I'd worked with and choreographers. I got to work with Agnes DeMille, on Rodeo.
Really?
Yeah. And I watched with all of these leaders, and that influenced who I am today. So I ended up becoming a tenured professor at UC Irvine, worked with Donald McHale there for 8 years, and was recruited by Gloria Kaufman to found the Gloria Kaufman School of Dance. I was a dean there for 8 years. After I had finished designing that curriculum and incredibly satisfied with the work that I did there, I realized I could still be at the service of the field. And when this opportunity came up and I applied for the position, it was truly the easiest audition of my life. And I say that because I left here thinking that was so organic. And I can be at the service of this mission, this organization, this community. So that's what brought me here.
Interesting. Wow. And I want to talk to you both about paperwork at some point and administrative side, because that is the deeply unsexy part of being a dean, of being an artistic director that I think is neglected, right? But is super, super important. My training as an attorney, and of course now, being a statistically based organization, that's the stuff that nobody talks about, right? So I before we talk about what makes a great transition, it would be great to hear from you about the inglorious but yet necessary work that both of you feel it's important to do, whether as a dean or an artistic director that drives an organization forward. Jodie, I'm going to go to you, and then Victoria to you.
I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity, one, to work in administration in academia. You learn about policies, procedures, how to read a budget. And prior to that, with Laguna Dance Festival and founding that organization in 2005, I understood what it meant to have a mission statement, a vision statement, work with a board of directors. So I'm so grateful for those opportunities, those steps as I was climbing up that ladder, I realized all of those skill sets, all of those tools lend themselves to where I am today and who I am.
I love that you talk about the mission, because I think some people just, plaster it on their website and then I'm going to do whatever I want to do. One of our previous sessions, we were talking to Dacre Baptiste at the Orpheum Theater of Alvin Ailey, also an interesting journey to her C-suite position, and Harris Ferris, who's the former ED at Pittsburgh. And they both came back to budgeting as an expression of the mission statement, which I'd never heard before and I thought was really interesting. Victoria, you wiped out a big debt. You built a new facility. You did all these interviews. If you want more Victoria, we have Global Conversations where she talks about splitting her brain and being artistic director thinking about this fabulous costume she'd like, and the CEO going, wait a minute, hang on, we got to pay for this. So Victoria, talk to us a little bit about the not so glorious but deeply necessary tasks that that a good artistic director CEO has to master.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing that was ironic to me is at that time there was a very distinct line. Over here was artistic, and over here was the executive administrative side of the organization. And I felt that I had been making a lot of artistic compromises, and yet in spite of that, there had been deficits. And this line, I couldn't get over there to the marketing and development side. And yet that efficiency, that being successful, completely impacted the caliber of the artistic product that we could bring to the stage. So I started getting quite frustrated with it. And, you know, they came to me and said, you know, really what we need to do is we need to cut the number of dancers. We need to cut the number of weeks. We're going to take it from 35 to 30 weeks. And I thought, you know, we can't compete. Other mid-range ballet companies were offering 35, 36, 37 weeks of work. That's the beginning of the end. And so that's when I thought, okay, how brave am I? You know, I asked the—
brave again. The first time was when your boyfriend and also, you know, and then
nothing like a challenge.
And then the second time is gulp. Okay. Right.
Yeah. So I did. I asked the board chair, can I step in? I just need to experiment it. I need to see, surely we can do something that's better. And so I did step in. It was in 2008, and that was right when the recession hit, of course. But the thing about it, the thing I learned, these are the things I learned.
Sweet
I
time.
learned that it wasn't a very practical thing to do. And yet I learned I could be practical because I was very involved on the artistic side, on the dream side. And I learned, just as Jodie talked about, I mean, you read that budget, you know exactly what's going on. You can see how marketing and development is connected to the artistic side of the organization. And I learned a lot about building relationships. And I'm not only talking about the dancers and the staff, I'm talking about the community. And one of the things that I learned is you don't have a big dream. You don't make a big dream come true without a major team gathered around you and just repeating sort of what you're saying. Yay, let's do it. Let's make it happen. We really need this. And we had the mission and we had the plan, but we couldn't execute because we were landlocked. We were inside this tiny, wonderful, lovely, most of my career life, very inspiring place to be in some ways when you're in the middle of an amazing rehearsal and you see this beautiful artistry. It doesn't matter what's around you. And yet we were limited because we couldn't reach out into the community. We couldn't have anything but our rigorous ballet technique classes. There wasn't recreational, there wasn't hip hop, there wasn't contemporary, there wasn't adult. So we just, you know, hunkered down and we took care of that. We did a big strategic plan, even in the middle of the recession, because we wanted to know, how are we valued by the community? Who are we at the very heart and soul of this organization and this community? Who are we? What do we bring? Why are we essential? So it was a great, great learning experience. And it was a great, great joy when we finally got a CEO and the company was stabilized and we had this deficit. I mean, we had this wonderful endowment, as you described, and we were ready to charge. And that's kind of when some of the dreaming about the building was able to come to fruition. Because, you know, listen, I just have to say, I don't highly recommend this for any artistic director or potential artistic director. You know, you're only so much. And yet it was so educational and so sort of glorious to feel this shift and this change. And not suddenly, but with this effort and with this determination and with this amazing team, we were finally able to bring in wonderful choreographers that we didn't have access to before because we stabilized financially. We figured out how we could move forward and how we could keep this. It's ironic, but in some ways, making something exciting and enticing, you know, that's an expensive idea, right? And yet, how are you going to gather that team I'm talking about around you? If they're not inspired, it ain't going to happen.
So I'm pulling some themes out here. Number one, stress testing. I mean, this is like the ultimate stress test. 2008, 2009. Number two, it comes back to the mission, and your mission was incorporated in your strategic plan, which you then went to the community and said, is this right? And you included the community. Folks, we are taping on December 9th. If you listen to my Dance Edit podcast with our research lead, Becky Farrell, you'll hear me give a shout out to Victoria and how Cincinnati has truly focused on and embedded in the community, which I'm seeing again from Jodie going forward, which I think is going to be the lifeline, the way people survive artistically and fiscally. The other theme I'm hearing is you have to be a constant cheerleader. You have to believe in what you're doing, and you can't let up, which tells me it requires an immense amount of psychic energy to kind of pull people together. Jodie, I'd love to hear your thoughts coming out of the pandemic, right? This is a second stress test. I think there's almost an existential crisis in the world of classical dance now. What are we doing? Where are we going? And again, I think you're the right person to lead from here. Can you talk a little bit about this time and how you want to move the company?
Sure, yes. Something that Victoria said makes me think of a quote I heard someone say once, which was, if your dreams do not scare you, they are not big enough.
Ooh.
And I love that. And I live by that, because if you don't dream with that sort of, it's bigger than yourself. It's almost bigger than the mission. If you don't dream big enough, well, then what? Right? And going back to what Victoria said, to inspire everyone around you, coming out of the pandemic, things are different. There is some sort of uncertainty. However, there's also a charge and a momentum that we haven't felt in a long time, not just because of the social unrest and the political unrest and the financial unrest, but there's also an awareness about, what it's like to be courageous, collaborative, and curious and full of courage. I like those C's. So to really move forward.
Can I add C for crazy maybe in there too, right?
Yeah, add number 4.
And I love what you said about psychic energy. You're absolutely right. And that's why at this season of my life, and when this opportunity came my way, I thought, well, I do have that energy. And I do believe in helping to push the mission and the organization forward and understanding the community. For me, the vision does have a lot to do with, I've been here for just over 4 months, understanding the community and what is it like to collaborate. So my vision is collaborating here locally with a fashion designer to work with Rena Butler, for example, and to then look to other directors nationally. How can we collaborate together to be stronger together, and to co-produce and to
Yay!
call all of your friends. I've been in the business of ballet for a long time, and many of my friends are BIPOC, many are female, many are male, many are in Europe, many are in New York or LA. So I feel as though bringing everyone together to get excited about moving what Victoria and the team set in place so beautifully, I feel like there's a charge, and I feel a sense of momentum.
Yep.
I have to say that I'm really proud for next season. About almost 60% of the choreographers are female. That's including myself and Victoria.
Extraordinary. And again, so I've got so many interesting things I want to talk about, but I do want to talk about leadership transition. Part of it is the extraordinary legacy that Victoria built of promoting female choreographers. And for those who are listening, who have heard me before, you probably heard me say this, but I find the most interesting work and the most sustained commitment to women is coming from smaller regional companies who are experimenting and doing interesting things. So Tony Pimble in Eugene, Christine Cox, sort of a generation down at Ballet X, Stoner Winslet, Victoria while she was there, Karen Burke at Dayton. And there are all these smaller regional companies that I think are lapping the really well-resourced big companies. I'm hoping, Susan Jaffe had already started making a change. We saw Tamara be a turnaround artist. So I'm actually very hopeful, even though our numbers are showing things going the other way. If I were a big dance funder, I would be looking at these companies to say, how can I help? What do you want to do? So talk a little bit about next season and Victoria and I have had this conversation before, but and we're going to do another series on this. But I'd love to hear how you two program seasons. I mean, Victoria had her CEO hat on and her artistic hat on. Jodie, you've run a dance festival. How do you go about thinking about it? Where does the budgetary consideration, how does the time, how does the community impact what you want to do?
Well, for me, as soon as I took on the role, I had started to formulate what does that 60th anniversary season look like, and to knock it out of the park. And so for me, in a way, it was just pure joy it was a puzzle piece also, because some of my thinking, it wasn't necessarily radical, but I wasn't paying close enough attention to the community in which I would be in. And so it actually, when I came here in July and actually physically moved here, then I started to listen, assess, realize, wait a second, a lot of what I programmed for next season is what I thought I would do, but some of it shifted. For example, we're doing a full-length Don Quixote, which hasn't been done here in decades. However, it's going to be after Petit Pas, but I'm bringing in Annabelle Lopez Ochoa and Gonzalo Garcia to come in and help me put on the production, because Annabelle, I said, you're so good at characterizations and narratives. Will you help me? Because Don Quixote, for example, is not just a bumbling idiot. If you read the most recent translation by Edith Grossman, he's actually gallant. And there's really some lovely words in the new.
Like he's not seeing visions. He's not mentally ill, old dude bumping into things.
Right. He's idyllic in a sense. I mean, it's such a modern masterpiece, even though it was written in 1605. But so that's an example of what I'm doing. I'm also bringing in many female choreographers, but also bringing in, for example, Jules. It's the 60th anniversary. It's the diamond anniversary. The reason for that, it includes the whole company and the Academy to get emeralds on stage. So I'm also artistic director of the Academy, and I have a big desire to help that curriculum move forward. And what does that mean? That means why not do something like that to help with the footwork, the musicality? It's so beautiful. So not only am I bringing in many women like Jennifer Archibald, who's been here, Rena Butler, myself, Amy Seiwert.
You're bringing in Amy, who was sort of the inspiration for Dance Data Project.
And exactly. And Tyler Peck, I'm bringing in.
Phenomenal. That's great.
So yeah. And then there's the choreographers that I love. Petit Moore by Yuri Killian. I'm staging Blake Works 3 by William Forsythe. And and Peter Chu, who I'm not sure you know, but I'm a big fan of his work. And I feel, and Dwight Roden also, because of my work with him in the past, and it's so visceral and so good for the dancers. Everything is formulated to not only advance the company forward and get the community excited, but also to enhance the dancers that we have and to push them. So I feel really good about the season.
I understand why you do. And as you know, me personally, in my own philanthropy, I'm absolutely on board, in part to honor Victoria's legacy. Victoria, talk a little bit about the legacy that when you were, I gave a couple of quotes about your ideal candidate, but I do want to talk, because you really were groundbreaking in terms of being a fierce advocate for female choreographers. And if anybody's read our latest study, you'll see, the numbers are actually going down, not up. Talk about that fight a little bit. Did you have to push your board of directors, or had you established a level of trust at that point?
Well, I think I had established a level of trust with the board, but the issue was really pulling women forward. And it's interesting, as artistic director, I'm constantly, I'm getting emails, I'm getting reviews, look at this ballet, watch this link, look at this review, here's my letter, here's what I want to do. I hear you do new works. Will you give me a world premiere? And it was the men coming at me. And I thought, how am I going to focus on the dearth of female choreographers in this art form when most of what I'm getting is coming from the male art form population? And so I really felt, I'd seen, like, for example, Melissa, I'd seen her do a couple of pieces, and she has a really unique voice. It's the woman I was rehearsing with when you described it earlier. And she she's this beautiful classical dancer, but her work is very earthy, and it's very bold, and it's big and unexpected. And, I like push that. Let's make it happen. I pushed her forward, and I literally pushed her. And, she's evolving. And I think another big, as a major example, was Jennifer Archibald, because she was a little bit unknown, when we first brought her in. And I love the idea that, I had seen some of her rehearsals in a studio, John McFall with Atlanta Ballet at the time. And I really loved how she was able to bring this hip hop isolation form into classical ballet, which could be awkward, but it was so well infused. She was able to take advantage. So I think what I was doing, Liza, is I was really making an effort to look, to seek, to find.
And there it is. And there it is. You were going the extra mile and making that effort. And that's really what I was trying to pull out. The job is overwhelming. There's a wonderful sci-fi movie with Michelle Yeoh called Everything Everywhere All at Once.
That's perfect.
It was made on a tiny little budget. Everybody should watch it. It's got Jamie Lee Curtis in it. And Michelle Yeoh runs this failing laundry, but it turns out she's got to be a superhero in her other life, and she's jumping through dimensions. And I was like, that sounds like an artistic director of a performing arts organization during the pandemic, right? And what I'm seeing is that people are so worried about their finances, so worried about audiences not returning, that they're doing what I call the retreat to safety. And they're programming a bunch of white males. I love the fact that you said you had to go out and look. I will never forget, I was on the phone with Victoria. She was one of my first big supporters. And I told her what a well-known artistic director said to me, which is, there are no good women choreographers. There are no good female choreographers out there. And I just thought, that can't be right. That was one of the other incentives for me to start DDP. But I understand how busy you all are, everywhere, all at once, right? Jodie, how do you source new voices? How do you find new people?
I'm constantly researching, whether it's on Instagram or talking to other colleagues in the field. And again, over my years in the profession, I've accumulated a Rolodex. So I just remain curious. I think that's key. And thanks to Victoria for paving the way, I realized it can be done. The one thing I do think that it's lacking, not just female voices, but female voices that are telling narratives, the full length.
Yes, right? Yes.
Really, I really feel that. And it's, we're doing Victoria's Nutcracker. Our Don Q is the concept of mind based on Petipa, but with Annabelle and Gonzalo Garcia. We're doing a children's program of Sleeping Beauty, and it's a collaboration of 3 of us women telling the story of Aurora. It's the untold story, so it's about empowerment. It's about female empowerment. It's a 50-minute version for children, but why can't we start there? Start there and tell the story just a little bit differently. And so I source by asking many of my own mentors, who have you seen lately? Who has reached out to you? Or I'm looking at other companies, but not trying to mimic other companies, but talking to Christine Cox. Hey, how was it working with so-and-so? I'm really interested in her work. And that's how, for me, sometimes people just come forward. I have somebody that I'm curating for the following year, the FY25. And I'm excited about her work, and she hasn't been seen much here in the States. So I'm just constantly curious and looking and trying to go to as many, for example, one dancer, Houston Thomas, I saw his work at the New York City Ballet Choreographic Institute showing in October of 2021. And he is a beautiful neoclassic choreographer, very excited about bringing his work here. So I'm just trying to see as much as possible all the time.
Which again is that psychic energy, right? I'm just sort of adding up all the things that y'all have to do during a day. A couple of thoughts come to mind. First of all, a little plug for DDP and statistics, which is take a look at our 22nd, by the way, since February 2019, our 22nd study, which looks at the current season and the plummeting numbers of women being commissioned. You had talked about female narrative work. My analysis is that there isn't a lot of it because women are not given full-length commissions, and it's hard to tell a story in 5-10 minutes. And women don't get to tell stories if they don't have a full company and if they don't have the time to do it. And until they're commissioned to do it, we're not going to see those. So Annabelle, Kathy Marston, but I'm sure there's other women out there. My second thought is, you had already talked about a different viewpoint. And instead of telling the same stories over and over again from exactly the same viewpoint, look what happens with Akram Khan's Giselle. Look what happens with Matthew Bourne's Sleeping Beauty now and Swan Lake, which just blew my mind. And how about some news stories?
I do think I am hopeful because I've talked to Susan and I think she's got some exciting programming for ABT. And so I'm incredibly hopeful that there are enough of us right now driving a very similar narrative about the narratives, right? And viewing ballet through a contemporary lens, right? And I don't just mean contemporary movement, but, a contemporary way of thinking about a similar story that we've heard before. So
Yep.
I'm very hopeful. I really am.
Yay. So we've got 3 hopeful people on the call. All right, last big question. And we got to keep it boom short because we're running out of time. What would you put in a leadership curriculum that you don't see already there? Long form question, how would you design a leadership curriculum for an artistic director? Victoria, you're up. 2 or 3 bullet points.
Okay. So I think what I would say is if you're really, truly interested, I'd get a little bit educated about it. I'd maybe shadow an artistic director. I would take advantage of your connections so that you could have experience in going through a strategic planning process, understanding the value of that. It would be okay to take a public speaking class because it's not only important that you're comfortable in front of 3,000 people, but the one-on-one with the patrons, there's got to be a warmth. There's got to be a way of describing and explaining. I'd do the budgeting thing like Jodie talked about. I mean, I didn't get into that until I was actually in the position, but it's so important to understand that relationship and to be able to read a budget. I would put, if you are interviewing, you must see the interview that you did with David Mallet and MCA. You must see that because that is a really important, and go through those points, like it's really important if you're serious about it, put together an amazing portfolio, but also make sure that it's read not only by your artsy friends, but also by those people on the search committee who are probably those corporate people. And I mean, it wouldn't hurt to take an HR class because it's so much about management of young people. And, we have to be sensitive, we have to be generous, and yet, we've got to push that discipline forward.
And you have
balancing that
sometimes, right? Like cutting a third of the dancers. I'm stealing all your ideas, by the way, hoping that someday we get funding. And because these programs exist in real life, fully funded for the opera, for theater, for classical music, etc. Dance really lags behind in that. We're trying to do this from your generosity, ladies, and thank you, with no money. I think it's really important to have no paywall, but there's so much more we could do. Jodie, your final thoughts on what you'd like to see?
Sure. I'll be brief. Exactly following up on what Victoria said, I think it's very important to understand marketing and how that strategy can influence so much of the artistic vision development. Obviously, EDI training to understand what a microaggression is and what does it mean to have unconscious bias. An historical survey course. So in other words, to really be a curator, curatorial practices, to understand a bit about the family tree in dance. So I think that's important.
Interesting.
I thought about that. And then my last one would be the understanding the management of people. So the psychology of management. And I think that would be an interesting addition because you're managing people and it's delicate too. You go from the boardroom to, going into a studio where, these artists are fragile very often. And so putting on a different hat and understanding what it means to be a good manager and a good visionary all in one.
Wow. I would love to create this curriculum. Will you guys stay on my faculty and help me put it together?
We're honored.
It's important. It really is.
Thank you both so very, very much. We are honored to have you as part of the Raising the Bar faculty, hopefully more to come. I so appreciate, Victoria, your unending support. Jodie, it's been so great to get to know you, and I'm so excited about what you're going to do with Cincinnati Ballet. Thank you both very, very much for doing this session with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Really, thank you. Yeah.
For everything.